Jeremy Schaap now on some black athletes frozen out of the history books.
These are not the faces of hockey. Of the four major team sports, hockey is by far the whitest. The conventional wisdom holds that the game was pioneered and codified by ruddy-faced men of French and Scotch-Irish extraction, men who looked nothing like these men. But it turns out that the game has never been lily white, not even 100 years ago. Not anyway, according to historians George and Darrell Fausty. They argue that hockey's roots are black and American.
A lot of this history was either conveniently ignored, lost, or simply forgotten.
The brothers Fausty are the authors of Black Ice, the lost history of the Colored Hockey League of the Maritimes. Hockey as we now know it, the slap shot, athletic goaltending, and skating, was introduced not by the white men who generally get the credit, but years earlier in Nova Scotia by the sons and grandsons of American slaves. In the absence of brawling, the hockey played in the CHL was a lively, offensively creative game. 50 years before Boom Boom Geoffrion introduced the slap shot to the NHL, the Fausties say it was a staple of the game in the CHL.
You see references describing what they called then baseball hockey, which was a slap shot. They didn't have the name for it back then. But one thing or another, they were slapping that puck down the ice 50 years ahead of everybody else.
The Fausties claimed that the first goaltender to play not just in an upright position was Henry Franklin of the Dartmouth Jubilees.
One of the biggest obstacles we have in revealing this research is the fact that people say, no, it can't be true. We've already credited certain individuals with some of these innovations. You must be wrong.
The story begins not in Canada, but here in Jericho, New York, on Long Island. Today, the Maine Made Inn is a restaurant. In the mid-19th century, it was the home of Abigail Hicks, who would hide runaway slaves in her attic. In fact, the Underground Railroad on Long Island, which ferried slaves to freedom in Canada, was operated out of this nearby church.
Runaways came up, and a lot of them, they hid out so they can continue up to Canada, and a lot of them stayed in the community.
Drakeford Levi's ancestor, Eliakim Levi, was among those who stayed on Long Island, helping hundreds of other runaways find their way to Canada, mostly to Halifax, the capital of Nova Scotia, the rugged, windswept province 700 miles north and east of Long Island. Eventually, these former slaves would help create the Colored Hockey League.
If you look at the history of the CHL, you see that the real legacy of the CHL is that this is the Underground Railroad legacy, and that is the legacy that gave us modern hockey.
The Fausties say that the Colored Hockey League was organized more than 30 years after the last runaway slaves reached Nova Scotia in about 1895. Initially a church league, the players adhered to a declaration of faith that emphasized sportsmanship and athleticism over brute force.
When I found out this league had used the Bible as their rule book for playing hockey, I says, wow, this is profound.
Black teams defeated the best of the white teams. Here, for instance, is a story about the Chibuctos, a powerful white team, falling to the all-black Eurekas 9-7 in 1899.
Often when the black teams had a good showing against them, you never had another repeat game. It was almost like, oh my God, we've had the hell scared out of us, we're not going to go back again.
The Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto, how do they recognize these innovations?
They don't.
But when it's built, the Black Hockey and Sports Hall of Fame in Nova Scotia will. Craig Smith is its president.
You go get a hockey book and look at a hockey book in the history of Canada. You don't see anybody in there that looks like me skating on the ice. You don't see any stories about any black hockey league in Nova Scotia or any contributions by blacks to the league other than Willie O'Ree breaking the color barrier in '58.
49 years ago, Willie O'Ree became the first black man to play in the National Hockey League. Smith wants to see those who came before O'Ree given their due.
The greatest recognition that I think that can be made is for them to say that, yes, this league was here, this league withstood the test of time, and this league gave a lot to what we now have in the NHL.
What does the game of hockey owe these pioneers?
They owe them recognition. They owe them the respect that's been void for 100 years.
Unfortunately, the proper due and the proper respect that's been due a lot of black athletes in this country has been slow in coming. And so now to go back and say, no, it was black people that revolutionized that sport, that's not going to happen easily. Not without a fight, that's for sure.
Born to Haitian parents and raised in the Montreal suburb of Tracy, Laroque was a black kid playing the nearly all-white sport of hockey, and he too never had it made.
It was always making me smile to read that because it was normal what I was going through because somebody else did it and I wasn't the only one. Because when he was a kid, he was just like me. He was a minority, he was one of the only one, and if he went through it, I knew I could go through it.
Everybody used to tell us, what are you playing hockey for? It's a white man's game.
Some of my own teammates refused to accept me because I was black.
From the moment he first stepped onto the ice, at age 5, George says he was on the receiving end of racial slurs.
Monkey, chocolate, like everything that has to be with being black.
You've been called things like chocolate, oh, you should go back to your country, hockey's not your sport, go play basketball.
The N-word, like I heard that a lot as a kid and stuff, and I had to stick up for myself all the time. I remember fighting all the time. One time when I was skating by the bench of the other team, people were banging their stick on the board when I was skating. Every time I was skating by their bench, they would call me the N-words.
My brother lost it during a game, which would happen sometimes, and he punched 3 guys in a row, and he got kicked out.
A lot of time I had tears in my eyes and stuff and just wiped them and didn't want to let people see it.
George's parents, appalled by the emotional toll hockey was taking on their son, tried to loosen his grip on the game he had come to love.
They were saying that, you know, you sure you want to play hockey? There's even one year my dad forced me not to play because it was so bad. He said, no, you're not going to play.
He went to the training camp to play for Freeway AA, and then it was cut. After he scores 5 goals and have 4 assists, he was cut just because he was black. And that year, I decided my son will not be playing hockey.
He really didn't think that it was a good idea, but just for my love of the game, and I've always told him, I said, Dad, I can't quit. I can't. I want to be like Jackie Robinson. My only way of proving people wrong is making it.
He entered the NHL draft and was selected by the Edmonton Oilers in the 2nd round in 1995. But to succeed as a professional hockey player, George would have to fight, literally, for his place in the game.
George Laroque is one tough guy.
I've always said what I'm doing today in the NHL is what I've been doing all my life. I've always been fighting and sticking up for myself, and that's the kind of player that I am.
Now in his 6th season with the Oilers, Larocque is a pure enforcer, one of the NHL's most feared fighters, a low-scoring winger far quicker with his fists than he is on the ice or around the net. If Jackie Robinson's story is finally about transcending the hatred of others, George Larocque's story rings with retribution.
I really dedicated the fact that I made it to the NHL to all those people that's calling me black names and black stuff and, you know, racial stuff, because I really use that as a motivation. I keep that in the back of my mind, and I said, one day you're going to regret everything you ever said.